welcome to this press briefing from the UK in a changing Europe, Britain's best think tank, obviously. We're here today to present the findings of a new report, which is out today, which reports on a bunch of focus groups we've done around the country, as well as the largest survey of its kind into people's attitudes towards levelling up. Delighted to be joined by two of the authors of the report, Sophie Stowers and Alan Wager, who in turn are going to take you through its main findings. So without further ado, Sophie, over to you.
Okay, I'm trying to change screen. So probably the first thing to start with is that really the public are quite proud of where they live. They're quite proud of the local area and they're proud to be from where they are. We don't really see much variation in that across region, across age, across gender, across socio-economic status at all. At the individual level, what we find is that the biggest factor that affects people's sense of local pride is their age and their level of financial security. So a person's age, their savings, their financial independence, their housing status, they're all correlated with that sense of local pride. When it comes to how people feel about regional inequality in general, we've seen a lot of sort of discussion about redistributive policy following the mini budget a few weeks ago. Our survey shows that actually most people in England think that the government should implement some kind of redistributive policy to tackle regional inequality. So around 68% of people agree with that idea. And again, we see very little difference in this figure when we compare groups by age, by gender, education, region, which suggests that, you know, it is a broadly popular idea, shifting money from sort of more well-off areas to poorer areas. As you can see from this figure here as well, we also found that if levelling up is framed around geographic inequalities, so shifting money from richer areas to poorer areas as opposed to between people, so rich people to poorer people, we see increased support for the idea. There is a north-south divide in our data, so respondents in the north definitely do think that they don't get their fair share of resources from central government, and that's particularly concentrated in the northeast of England, where many sort of red wall seats are located, and over 90% of people say that their area doesn't get its fair share of funding. And there is definitely that sense that comes across that MPs and parties are too focused on the southeast and London to the detriment of other parts of England. But something that did also crop up quite a lot was the idea of sort of intra-regional inequalities. So a lot of respondents would compare where they live to sort of their nearest big metropolitan area, so Nottingham to Derby, Blyth to Newcastle, and would think that's unfair that actually when it comes to a sort of shift in funds from central government, it tends to go to those type of areas as opposed to be fairly distributed across the region. We also ask people what they think has got better or worse in their local communities over the last decade, and we saw that actually for the most part people do think that their communities have been in decline over the last 10 years. So the only thing that seems to have significantly improved is access to the internet, and then there are also smaller positive scores for housing, schools and leisure activities. But across England, two issues stand out in particular, and that's the affordability of public transport, more so than the quality, and crime levels. So they're both seen by many respondents to have declined in the last 10 years in their local area. And other respondents in the focus groups actually saw a lot of these issues as being interlinked. So sort of a lack of opportunities contributes to brain drain, which then contributes to a lack of resources and investment in an area, and then high rates of crime. We then did also ask, okay, so what would make your area better if you could choose sort of your most preferred policy options that would make the biggest difference? And even though public transport is a big issue, it's not actually a priority for respondents, and neither are issues like jobs, like high streets, which come up a lot when we're talking about the levelling up agenda. Instead, actually, the most popular policy options amongst the public were things like reducing crime and improving access to good quality healthcare. And I think that points to a tension between sort of what the levelling up agenda has been centred around so far, sort of these very local issues and the idea of shifting money to the very local level, when these issues, sort of, you know, crime and healthcare, are typically the responsibility of national government and would actually be better tackled through a sort of national level programme as opposed to devolution to the local level. So,
cheers, cheers, Sophie.
Thank you. Alan, over to you.
PowerPoint. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. So how people want how people want the place where they live to change is, I suppose, one thing. Who they trust to do it and what political barriers stand in the way is, I suppose, quite another. So as Sophie set out, the idea of levelling up in principle has significant support, but the sort of hoary process of trade-offs and the choices in reality was always going to potentially be a bit more complicated. So after asking people about the principle of levelling up, we asked this sort of specific question. Do you think the north of England gets less than its fair share of government spending? Do you think the status quo is just about right? Or do you think public services in the north actually get more spending from central government than they should? In short, do you sort of think the north of England gets a raw deal? Yes, no, it's roughly about okay, or no, and we should ensure no taxpayers' money makes it across the River Trent from Whitehall, if you like. So the size of our survey meant we had a big, sort of over 1,500 sample, both of Conservative voters in the north and Conservative voters in the south. So among northern Conservative voters in 2019, there was sort of near universal agreement, 90% agreement, that the north doesn't get its fair share of government spending. For what it's worth, the figure for Labour voters in the north is 92%. So far, so good when it comes to a levelling up consensus. But if you look then at Conservative voters in the south, you begin to see the problem. Fewer than half of Conservative voters in the south sort of buy what is sort of a fairly standard definition, if you like, of levelling up. Indeed, almost a quarter think that the north currently gets too much spending. So this sort of reveals the tension in that Conservative coalition that Boris Johnson was able to create in 2019 when it came to actually the process of making this reality. The second issue for the Conservative Party is, I suppose, a question of political trust and where voters feel that it is Conservative and Labour territory. So this looks at every region of England. Again, we've got a sample enough of over 1,000 people in every region of England, and looked at the question of which party is felt to care most about the respondents' local area. This data is from before the Conservative Party's big collapse in the polls, but it shows that the deep brand identities of both parties, and it shows that they're much the same as they've probably been for about the last century. So if you look at the southeast of England, then both parties are. Then the Conservative Party is seen as slightly more likely to care about the southeast. With the southwest, that's the lowest because there are other parties involved. And if you look at London, you see the Labour Party has a big lead. But if you go to the northeast, Yorkshire and Humber, and the northwest, I mean, this is the message where the levelling up message was tailored towards, if you like, the regions of England. Then you see that voters are much more likely to intrinsically trust the Labour Party than the Conservatives. And levelling up was always an attempt to address this problem, to get to sort of ground that the changing electoral geography that came with Brexit within concrete economic gains for the new electoral coalition of the Conservatives. But a couple of years in, there's no signs that those fundamental sort of laws of British politics about who's most trusted where really did change that much. What you see from these numbers, though, is that the numbers highest, London 29%, lowest 15%, knocking around 15 to 29%. Basically, there's not really very much trust for both parties anywhere. That's probably one of the key messages from it. We do find, however, that if you start thinking about it in terms of layers of government, then some are more trusted than others. The general pattern is that the more local the level of representation, starting with local councillors, going towards central government, the greater the feeling that the politician cares about the area. So just 9% of respondents said that they think the government in Westminster cares about the local area. And this was when we asked this when there still was a functioning government in Westminster, and whereas 45% of local of the public, feel that their local councillor, cares about the area and so on. One relative bright spot, I suppose, for those sitting in Westminster is that people do have the sense that their local MP does care a little bit about where they live. So we asked people, and we named their local MP in the response in this survey. So people had the name of their local MP. And roughly a third of people say they do think that their local MP does care about their area. I mean, this highlights, the problem that Sophie mentioned here. Citizens are deeply sceptical about how much central government cares about their area, especially those parts that are most geographically distant from London. Yet, as Sophie said, the main priorities that they want from levelling up are things actually that only central government really ultimately can deliver. And actually, even those services that local government does deliver are the ones that have been and continue to be most vulnerable to spending constraints. So finally, all this supports the belief that that things are quite bleak. But one of the solutions, if you like, that's within the levelling up agenda is the belief that devolution can be, if not a magic bullet, but something that can help bring politics a bit closer to people. And this survey was the first time that anyone was able to provide a comprehensive analysis of how trusted each of the metro mayors are in the region that they represent. So we had a big enough sample that we could ask voters in the Tees Valley what they thought about Ben Houchen, what voters in the West Midlands thought about Andy Street, what voters in London thought about Sadiq Khan, and so on. And on the left, we asked we asked about whether we think each of these mayors cares about their area. On the right, it's about this question of trust. So what we see is on this left measure, do you think your local mayor, Ben Houchen, cares about your area? Ben Houchen comes top. Andy Burnham comes second, Andy Street comes third, Sadiq Khan comes fourth. So there's a sense that Ben Houchen is someone that people think is quite in touch with the concerns of voters in the Tees Valley. When it comes to the question of who is most trusted on the right, you see that Andy Burnham has quite a strong position and has the strongest position among voters in Greater Manchester compared to any of the other metro mayors in the regions they represent. And there are two lessons here, I think, to close on. The first is that while voters maybe like local representation and ever closer local representation, there's also the sense that they're more likely to approve of politicians with a national profile. So there's another sort of paradox here in terms of the local and the national. And the second here, and this speaks to the potential for devolution as sort of bright spot and as sort of solution to some of these problems around levelling up, is that the North East was far and away the set of the public in England with the highest rates of distrust and discontent and disconnect with politics. Yet when a politician like Ben Houchen comes along, who seemed to speak for the local area, voters are willing to put some faith in that representative. So I'll end it there.
Thanks, Alan. For those interested in the report, you can go to our website and download it. If you go to our Twitter feed as well, you'll see that there's lots of stuff in the regional and national newspapers about it. But for the moment, thank you both. It's a fantastic piece of work. I recommend it to all of you. Thanks ever so much.